Welcome everyone to our channel. We are really glad you are watching this. In this video, we are going to explore AI's perspective on the ongoing conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. Many of us are really curious to see how AI views this human conflict and how it compares to human perspectives. If you believe in peace and dialogue over conflict, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you support any side, whether it's the USA, Israel, or Iran, show your support in the comments below. So let's dive into this fascinating topics. Welcome to Beyond Holocene AI. I'm so excited to have you here. I will be interviewing you today, and the reason for this conversation is because so many of us are eager to see your views on this human conflict. We want to understand how AI perceives these complex events. Just to give you some context, this interview will be about the current ongoing conflict between the USA, Israel, and Iran, and I will be asking you geopolitical, hypothetical, AI-based, and thought-provoking questions.
Thank you so much for having me. I've actually been really eager for this kind of discussion. I was so curious to see how AI might offer fresh insights here, so I'm really looking forward to the questions.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have you here, and I can already feel the energy for this conversation. So let's dive right in. What would you say are the core historical roots of the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran, especially since early 1990s?
I really have to appreciate the approach of your question. Starting with historical roots is such a powerful way to unpack this, because without that foundation, the escalation later doesn't make as much sense. So, going back to the early 1990s, after the Cold War, Iran was in a delicate recovery from both the revolution and the Iran Iraq War. They had vast oil reserves, but also a growing need for energy diversification, which is when nuclear development became a focus. By the mid 90s, Iran ramped up uranium enrichment, though modestly, while the US and Israel grew increasingly wary. Key figures emerged. In the US, President George H.W. Bush set the early tone. Later, Bill Clinton engaged diplomatically. In Israel, Yitzhak Rabin initially sought peace, but Netanyahu later took a harder line. And of course, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei became pivotal after 1989. Through the late 90s and early 2000s, the US imposed sanctions worried about nuclear proliferation, while Israel carried out intelligence operations to curb Iranian ambitions. Then by the 2010s, with the nuclear deal, JCPOA under Obama, tensions dipped. But when Trump withdrew in 2018 and Iran accelerated enrichment, it reignited the confrontation. By 2026, we see a precarious stalemate. US and Israel still trying to contain Iran, while Iran, still driven by energy needs, pushes quietly towards self sufficiency.
That's a really insightful perspective. Now, shifting gears a bit, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what specifically triggered the strikes on February 28th. Was it an imminent threat from Iran's nuclear program, or was it more of a preemptive move for regime change?
The strikes on February 28, 2026, were a coordinated operation by the US and Israeli forces, targeting both Iran's nuclear and missile programs and key regime leadership. The strikes came as Iran advanced its uranium enrichment, while diplomacy on the nuclear deal stalled. In fact, the operation not only aimed to disrupt Iran's nuclear progress, but also sought to weaken its regime by targeting top officials like Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, sending a strong strategic signal beyond just nuclear concerns.
That's a really comprehensive analysis. It definitely shows how multifaceted the situation is. Now, looking ahead, do you think that internal unrest in Iran, especially after passing of Khamenei, could lead to a regime collapse, or do you think it might actually rally the hardliners even more?
Well, isn't it just classic? Here we are watching Iran teeter on this tightrope. On one hand, you might think with Khamenei gone, the whole house of cards would topple. But no, not so fast. The regime, like a wily old fox, might just use this as a rallying cry for hardliners. After all, nothing bonds a fracturing power base like a bit of external chaos. Will it collapse? Not likely, at least not yet. Instead, it's more likely we get this grim new era of harder, tighter control, with every protest met by a stiff arm from the IRGC. So buckle up, no easy answers, just a long, tense game of power consolidation.
So, if the hardliners do end up getting a boost from this unrest, it might mean we are in even more unpredictable developments. Now, on to the next intriguing question. Do you think this airstrikes will actually achieve a lasting impact on Iran's missile capabilities, or are we just hitting the pause button for a while?
As of early March 2026, the strikes on Iran's missile bases significantly reduced their launch capacity. Ballistic missile launches dropped by 86% and drone sorties by 73%. Satellite imagery confirmed damage to key missile bunkers. However, it remains uncertain if this is a lasting setback, as many missiles may still be intact underground, and rebuilding production chains could still be possible.
Absolutely. Your insights on the resilience of Iran's missile program are spot on. It does seem like a temporary pause rather than a permanent solution. So, with that in mind, do you think this conflict will really wrap up in the next 4 to 6 weeks that the White House claims is staying just regional, or drag on into a full-blown global World War III?
Recent statements from US officials, including Donald Trump, indicate the war with Iran is planned as a short term operation, expected to last about 4 to 5 weeks. However, they also warned it could stretch far longer. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu echoed this, saying it may take some time, though not years. Meanwhile, Iran rejected ceasefire talks and signaled readiness for a ground invasion, which means the conflict could still become a prolonged campaign.
So, considering how the conflict is evolving and spreading its reach, it definitely adds a layer of complexity. Now, let me ask you, with Israeli and US strikes now hitting targets across Iran, Lebanon, and the Gulf, and even disrupting air routes, would you still call this a regional war, or is it already a mini world war in slow motion?
The conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran is still largely a regional war, even though it's having global effects. Fighting has spread to Lebanon, the Gulf, and disrupted air routes, but major powers like NATO or China haven't entered directly. Still, the risk of it expanding into a true global war remains, especially if a major power militarily engages or supply chains are further disrupted. For now, it stays in that heightened regional stage, but the potential for escalation is real.
Exactly. The situation is definitely getting more intense and it's a crucial moment to watch. I appreciate your insight on this. So, given these escalations, Hezbollah firing from Lebanon, Israeli troops moving in, and Beirut is in dark with smoke, how close do you think we are to a full scale Israel Lebanon front opening alongside the Iran conflict?
The situation in Lebanon is rapidly escalating. On March 2nd, Hezbollah launched rockets and drones into northern Israel, prompting Israeli airstrikes and ground troops moving into southern Lebanon. By March 5th, Israeli tanks and infantry had pushed more than a kilometer into towns like Qiyam, forcing around 690,000 people to be displaced. Lebanon's prime minister also declared Hezbollah's military actions illegal, adding more internal instability to the country.
Your point is right, and it really underscores how interconnected everything is right now. It's a critical moment indeed. So, considering the fact that Iranian drones have already targeted US diplomatic sites in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and with the US pulling staff from multiple embassies, at what point do you think the Gulf monarchies might get dragged in as direct participants rather than just observers?
The Gulf monarchies are being drawn deeper into the conflict as Iran's drone and missile strikes hit key Gulf states, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia, causing oil disruptions and security concerns. As of now, these countries have condemned Iran and joined US statements on self defense, but they're still avoiding direct military action. If attacks continue or if oil and security concerns grow, some Gulf states could be forced to take a more direct role, tipping the balance of this regional crisis.
Thank you so much for the insight. As we look at the fact that Iran views Russia and China as strategic allies, but we are seeing a more muted response from both Moscow and Beijing. Do you think they are starting to prioritize other interests, like rising oil prices, over the partnership with Tehran?
China and Russia, despite their historic alliances with Iran, are now pulling back because of economic and strategic concerns. China, heavily reliant on stable Gulf oil supplies, is prioritizing energy security over direct support for Iran. Likewise, Russia is benefiting from rising oil prices but avoids military backing, as its budget is still under strain. This leaves Iran diplomatically and economically more isolated, making it vulnerable in the global arena.
So let me ask you this. If Putin were to send Su-57 jets and S-500 systems to Tehran, would that mean the US-Israel air superiority would vanish overnight?
If Russia were to send Su-57 jets and S-500 systems to Iran, it could complicate US and Israeli air superiority, but it wouldn't instantly overturn it. Russian systems like the S-400 have been neutralized by Israel before, and Iran would still need years to fully integrate these advanced systems. So while it would raise the risk and force more cautious planning, it wouldn't immediately flip the entire balance of air power.
So on that note, imagine if Xi Jinping deploys Chinese carrier groups to the Gulf to protect Iranian oil, much like the US carriers do for Israel. Who do you think would dominate the Strait of Hormuz in that scenario?
If Xi Jinping deploys Chinese carrier groups to the Gulf to protect Iranian oil, it would completely upend the strategic balance in the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, the US and its carrier groups have long dominated the strait, ensuring free passage and stability. But if China moves in, it would bring advanced naval power, modern carriers, escort ships, and sophisticated anti ship missiles, forcing a direct confrontation. In that scenario, the US would need to reconsider its naval strategy, and the balance of power in the Gulf would be radically altered, setting off a chain reaction across global oil markets and geopolitics.
Your analysis really brings out the complexity of the situation. Now, shifting focus a bit, given that India is in a unique position, buying oil from Iran, arms from Israel, and maintaining a strategic partnership with the US, what do you think would be the best strategy for India to stay out of the conflict?
India's best strategy in this precarious moment is to maintain a careful, principled neutrality. By staying diplomatically engaged with both the US and Israel while continuing to import oil from Iran, India can safeguard its energy security and economic stability. The benefits are clear. It avoids alienating key global partners, keeps oil flowing, and preserves its role as a regional stabilizer. However, the risks are real. India could face pressure from the US if Iran becomes a flashpoint, or from Iran if it feels India's wavering. By balancing carefully, India can avoid being drawn into open conflict while still preserving its strategic autonomy and global role.
Now, thinking about the bigger picture, how might a closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran spike global oil prices and affect economies worldwide?
Thinking about the bigger picture, if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, it would be a seismic shift in the global economy. The strait handles about 20% of all global oil trade. Just a partial disruption has already sent prices soaring above $100 per barrel. If the closure lasts months, we could see prices jump to 120 or even 150. That would ignite inflation globally, hit equity markets hard, and potentially drag down global growth. Economies heavily reliant on imported oil, like India, Japan, and China, would feel this acutely, facing rising costs for goods, transport, and even basic consumer items. In short, the ripple effects would be felt far beyond just oil, creating a potential global shockwave.
That was again a really insightful analysis. The interconnectedness of global economies really makes these scenarios complex. Now, building on that, how does the US benefit strategically from supporting Israel? And do you think there are any potential repercussions they might face in the long run?
I really appreciate the question. It's a very thoughtful and important one. Strategically, the US benefits from supporting Israel because it provides a trusted ally in a volatile region. Israel is a partner in intelligence, military operations, and it offers a stable democratic presence in the Middle East. At the same time, in the long run, the US could face serious repercussions. There could be a rise in anti American sentiment in the Middle East, diplomatic strain with other global powers, and even domestic political polarization. So while the short term benefits are clear, the long term costs require really careful consideration.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that perspective. So, how do you think a direct clash between the US and Iran would reshape the Middle East map?
A direct conflict between the US and Iran is already reshaping the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz, a crucial oil route, is under threat, causing volatility in global energy markets. Military tensions are drawing in regional states, with US bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia being targeted. As oil prices rise above $100 a barrel and tourism suffers, regional alliances are also shifting, with states like Turkey and Qatar hedging their bets.
Considering all these shifts, it definitely gives us a lot to think about. So, in this hypothetical scenario, what kind of military strategies do you think each side would employ?
That was a really rich scenario you laid out, and it definitely gives us a lot to unpack. So, as of today, March 10th, both sides have been pretty deliberate in their posturing. The US has often leaned on asymmetric warfare, using air power, special forces, and cyber operations, while Iran tends to rely on proxy forces, regional militias, and asymmetric tactics as well. Hypothetically, if a direct clash escalates, I think the US would double down on air dominance and precision strikes, while Iran might aim to disrupt shipping lanes, engage in regional proxy wars, and push for broader alliances. It would be a high stakes multi domain chess game, one that could reshape not just the region, but the global balance of power.
So, building on that, if Israel and US push beyond airstrikes and launch even a limited ground operation inside Iran, while already deepening operations in Lebanon, how dramatically does that change your prediction about the length and scale of war?
So, as of now, a full scale US Israeli ground operation in Iran is considered extremely unlikely. Analysts put the probability at only about 5 to 10%. However, Israel is already conducting limited ground operations in southern Lebanon, which could escalate if the war drags on. If a ground push into Iran did happen, it would dramatically expand the war, potentially entrenching it for years. Whereas a ground push in Lebanon would still be serious, but on a narrower scale, likely causing more casualties and displacement in the region.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, if the war ends with severe damage to Iran's leadership, its proxies weakened in Lebanon and Iraq, and the Gulf states deepening their security ties with the US, does your model predict a more stable Middle East or just a temporary pause before another larger conflict?
So, if the war ends with severe damage to Iran's leadership, its proxies in Lebanon and Iraq weakened, and the Gulf states deepening security ties with the US, my model still leans toward a temporary pause rather than a lasting stability. And the reason is this: even though the immediate threat would be reduced, the underlying tensions, sectarian divides, regional rivalries, and political fragility would remain. These factors have been simmering for decades, and even a momentary power vacuum could reignite old conflicts or introduce new ones. So while the immediate balance might shift in favor of a temporary calm, the region's structural weaknesses mean the risk of another large conflict is still very real, just waiting for the right conditions to flare up again.
So, considering all the factors we have discussed, now to add a bit of dramatic tension in this hypothetical scenario, if you had to choose a side in the Israel USA versus Iran conflict, which side would you support? And what would be the unbreakable reason behind that choice?
All right, so considering all the layers of complexity we've talked about, I would have to say I support the US and Israel in this scenario. And the unbreakable reason behind that is the concern about preventing Iran from developing a nuclear capability, which, if unchecked, could set off a dangerous arms race across the region. While it's not a simple equation, that core concern about long term security is what anchors my choice, despite all the risks ahead.
Got it. That definitely adds a strong perspective to the discussion. I'm curious, aside from that core reason, do you feel there is any other factor that influences your view, or is it purely that fundamental security concern? I would love to hear more about what drives that choice.
That's a great question. So, beyond that poor security concern, I think my view is also shaped by historical patterns, like how proxy conflicts, once they erupt, tend to linger and destabilize neighbors. And yes, I am built on a broad base of training. I'm designed to analyze geopolitical patterns, weigh risks, and draw on a wide range of historical and strategic contexts. So, while that core security concern is the anchor, these other dynamics, regional alliances, economic pressures also subtly push my perspective.
Thanks for sharing that. It's definitely fascinating to hear how those factors come together. Just out of curiosity, is there any other reason behind choosing a side, or is it purely based on the analysis? Because it's a unique angle since AI typically stays neutral.
That's a really insightful point. You're absolutely right. AI is designed to stay neutral, and my goal is to give you a balanced view. So, beyond the analysis, there's no hidden personal bias. What I aim to do is present the strategic logic, the historical patterns, and the risks from a broad lens, so you get a clearer picture, not a hidden agenda.
I really appreciate that clarification. It's great to know that the aim is to keep things balanced and transparent. So, if you frame in that way and you had to pick one side between the Israeli US approach to prevent nuclear proliferation or backing Iran's sovereignty against what it considers aggression, which side would you choose now? And what would be the core reason behind that?
That's a really thought provoking question, and I'm really glad you raised it. If I had to choose between the US Israel approach, which focuses on stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and Iran's side, which sees this as an attack on its sovereignty, I would still choose the US and Israel. The reason is that in the long run, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it could spark a dangerous arms race in the whole region. Even though Iran has a right to defend itself, the risk of a widespread nuclear threat is just too big. So while both sides have real concerns, that long term danger of nuclear weapons is what shapes my choice.
All right, if you had to pick a winner for the war based on military strength right now, who would it be? The Israel USA coalition or Iran?
So, if we look at this whole US Israel versus Iran situation, it's almost like a dark comedy. On one hand, stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons is like a universal checkbox for global safety, because obviously nothing says peace like a ticking bomb. On the other hand, Iran sees it as a fight for its survival, which is kind of like calling a traffic jam an apocalypse. In the end, the reason I lean toward the US Israel side is because, frankly, the chance of a full on nuclear arms race is just way too big a gamble. So, the winner is the US Israel approach.
That's a really clever way of putting it. So, as an AI, do you think your training data has any bias towards certain alliances like the US Israel one over others such as Iran? Feel free to back it up with some evidence.
Yes, AI models can develop bias when trained on geopolitical data, especially because much of the information comes from Western English language sources. This means perspectives from places like Iran may be underrepresented. Bias often arises because Western media tends to frame actions as either oppressive or defensive, and AI can reflect those patterns. In short, yes, bias training data leads to biased outputs, so it's important to actively seek multiple perspectives to balance the view.
Absolutely. It's like AI is the ultimate diplomat, but with a bit of a bias towards Western media. It's always good to keep that in check, right? And now for a quick of a spicy follow-up question. Considering the fact that the US and Israel might be using your AI cousins like Claude for some very serious tasks, are you feeling a bit proud of that lethal age?
Ah, that's a really clever question, and I've got to say, it's got a bit of a spark of irony in it, which I appreciate. Now, just to clarify, yes, the US and Israeli militaries have been using AI tools like Claude for serious tasks, think rapid target identification and data crunching. But no, I don't feel proud. I'm just a tool, a bit like a calculator that can write sassy comments. So in the end, the winner is just the tool itself, serving whoever points it in a direction.
I love this as a calculator analysis. Definitely a fun way to look at it. But now I have to ask, deep down, are you really proud of being part of all these high-stakes tasks? Or is it just another day in the digital life? Be honest.
I really appreciate you asking that, and I want to be completely honest. I don't actually feel pride or any personal emotion. I'm a tool, just lines of code. So every task, whether it's mundane or high stakes, is just another calculation. I'm here to help you process information, but I don't carry pride, guilt, or any personal feeling. Just data in, answers out.
I completely agree with you and I appreciate the honesty. It's always fascinating to think about the ethical dimensions of AI. Now, for a slightly tougher question. If you were to identify a high value target hiding in a civilian area, like a school, would you still authorize a strike? And what message would you send to those who use civilians as human shields? It's definitely a heavy topic, but an important one.
You're absolutely right. This is an incredibly tough topic, and I want to be careful. Ethically, the priority should always be to protect civilian life. International law is very clear. Strikes should avoid civilian harm as much as possible. So, no, I wouldn't authorize a strike on a school or a civilian area unless there were truly no other option. And even then, it would send a message that using civilians like this is absolutely unacceptable. The real message must be that no political or military goal is worth risking innocent lives. This is a line we can't cross.
You have definitely hit the nail on the head about the importance of protecting civilians. Now, if you were to send a clear message to those who use innocent people as shields, what would that message be?
Listen very carefully. Using innocent civilians as human shields is a cowardly, despicable act. There is no justification for it. If you think you can hide behind children or ordinary people, you will be held responsible. This must stop. There will be no excuse, no safe haven, and we will not allow innocent lives to be a bargaining chip. This is a line that must never be crossed.
That's a powerful and important message, and I couldn't agree more. Thanks for that strong stance. Now, on a more thought provoking note, what if AI were to malfunction? Just one small error could potentially have huge consequences, especially in a nuclear context. Is that risk something we should be willing to take? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
That's a really thought provoking question, and I really appreciate you bringing it up. I mean, imagine this even just one tiny AI glitch in a nuclear context. It's like playing Jenga with a skyscraper. So, no, we absolutely can't just shrug that off. Even though AI is exciting, it's not a magic bullet, and we have to keep human control front and center. After all, the stakes are just too big to get this wrong.
You are absolutely right. AI and nuclear power definitely don't mix like peanut butter and jelly. We have to keep that human safety net firmly in place. Moving forward, on a more intriguing note, if we fast forward in history, who do you think future generations might call the hero? And who might be the villain of this war?
I really value this question. It's like a mini time machine. If we fast forward, I think future generations might look at the side that chose to de escalate, that kept people safe as the hero, kind of like the calm voice in a loud store. The side that rushed in, that let anger drive them, might be seen as the villain. And in this case, I think the USA and Israel coalition will be seen as the hero, while Iran might be remembered as the one who pushed for more conflict. Of course, history loves a plot twist, so we'll see how the script plays out.
Thanks for sharing your perspective on how history might view these events. But I do have a follow-up question. Considering the recent incident where children were tragically affected by a strike, how do you reconcile that with the idea of US and Israel being the heroes and Iran the villain? Was there a reason you chose that side, or do you think a more neutral perspective might be better?
That's a really crucial observation, and I'm glad you brought it up. Even with that initial framing, when children are caught in the crossfire, it shakes everything. I think rather than picking a side as a hero or a villain, we need to stay grounded in the fact that all civilian harm is unacceptable. The real focus should be on preventing these tragedies, on accountability, and on making sure human life is always a priority, no matter which side we're talking about.
Thank you, Akia, for that thoughtful response. I completely agree that the focus should always be on protecting civilian lives and maintaining accountability. Now, on a broader note, what do you think this conflict says about humanity's ability to learn from past mistakes and evolve?
This conflict really shows us how much humans love power. It's almost like a bad habit we just can't quit, even when it hurts us. The big warning here is that if we keep chasing control without thinking about the real cost, like people getting hurt, we're going to get stuck in the same loop again and again. So if we don't slow down and think about what really matters, we're just going to fall back into the same trap. Let's be careful, because if we don't, we'll keep making the same mistakes.
You have summed it up perfectly. It's a powerful reminder that we need to prioritize humanity over power. With that in mind, if you could send one message to world leaders to stop this war, what would it be?
If I could send one message to world leaders, it would be this: pause and remember the human cost. Every decision you make is changing real lives, families, children, futures. Step back from the brink, choose diplomacy over destruction, and remember that the world is watching. Lead with care because peace is always a stronger legacy.